You're being heartless, Iris. Your father and I deserve our grandchildren. The turkey had gone cold between us. 8 chairs around the oak table and the seat in the middle, the one with the carved roses on the back, was empty. It had been Hannah's chair for 22 years. She hadn't come. I didn't argue. I reached into my purse and laid a photograph on the table, face up, between the cranberry sauce and my mother's wrist. Black and gray. A grainy oval. A small curl of a body suspended in dark water. The handwriting in the corner read, Hannah Rose Hollister, 32 weeks, April 1989. My mother's eyes moved down to the picture. They did not move back up. My son Theo ran in from the den and reached for her, the way he always did. She lifted her hand, automatic, the muscle memory of someone reaching for a child she had already grieved, and then her fingers stopped, midair, an inch from his cheek. She pulled her hand back as if she had touched a stove. I had been theirs for 34 years. The photograph had been theirs for 36. If this story is already sitting heavy in your chest, please take a moment to like and subscribe. It helps these stories reach the women who need to hear them. And drop your location and your local time in the comments. I love knowing where in the world you're listening from tonight. I'm Iris Lambert. I'm 34 years old. I'm an art teacher at a middle school in Asheville, North Carolina, and I'm married to a man named Daniel who builds software in our spare bedroom. We have 2 kids, Theo, 5, and Lila, 2. This is the story of the ultrasound my grandmother left me when she died. Let's go back 17 months, to the morning I got the call. It was the first week of June, 2025, last day before summer break. My classroom smelled like turpentine and wet paper towels because I'd let the 7th graders do a final wash on their watercolor portraits, and Marisol Ortega had cried again because her sister looked like a fish. I was holding her shoulder and telling her that fish were also beautiful when my phone buzzed face down on my desk. It was my father. My father does not call during the workday. My father does not call at all, really. My father texts in lowercase letters and waits for replies. So I picked up. Iris, he said, your grandmother's at mission. They don't think she's going to make it through the night. I told him I was coming. I told the substitute aide where the watercolors were drying. I drove the 20 minutes to Mission Hospital with my hands at 10 and 2 and the radio off because there was nothing on the radio I could stand to hear. The light through the windshield was the wrong color for grief. Too gold. Too forgiving. I parked in the visitor's deck and rode the elevator up to the cardiac wing. And that's where I saw something I hadn't expected to see, and that I would remember later when everything else fell apart. My mother was at the end of the hallway near a window, with her back to me. She had her phone pressed to her ear. Her free hand was in her hair. And she was saying, into the phone, in a voice I had not heard in my entire life, soft, broken, the kind of voice a person uses for their own daughter. Honey, I'm going to need you here. Please come, please. She wasn't talking to me. I was 30 feet away. She had not turned around. She had not heard the elevator. She was talking to Hannah Reeves. I knew because I heard the name soft. I heard her say, Hannah, please. I stood there for 9 seconds. I counted them on my watch. Then I walked the rest of the hallway and I touched my mother's shoulder, and she jumped, and she ended the call too fast, and she said, "Oh, Iris, you made it." The room my grandmother was in had a window facing the mountains. The blinds were half open. My grandmother, Constance Whitaker, 87, born in a holler outside Boone, a woman who had buried 2 husbands and never once cried in front of either of her daughters, was on her side with her eyes mostly closed, breathing the way old people breathe at the end. Like every breath was a small decision. I sat next to the bed. I took her hand. She opened her eyes 1/4 of an inch. She looked at me, not at my mother on the other side, at me. She said, "The box, Iris." I said, "What box, Grandma?" She closed her eyes. She said, "Yours. Open it last. Open it when you can stand it." She died 40 minutes later. My mother held her other hand. My father stood at the foot of the bed with his hands in his pockets. My sister, Adeline, was on her way up from Weaverville and didn't make it in time. Nobody called Hannah Reeves to tell her my grandmother was gone. Nobody had to. My mother had already done it before she'd called me. That was the first morning of the worst 17 months of my life. And I didn't know it yet. I thought it was just the day my grandmother died. I want you to understand what 22 years can do. Hannah Reeves walked into my mother's kitchen for the first time on a Saturday afternoon in November 2003. My sister Adeline was 16. Hannah was 14. They had met in a dance class at the YMCA the month before and had become inseparable in that way teenage girls do, where one of them is louder and the other is prettier, and neither of them is sure yet which one she is. I was 12. I was sitting on the kitchen counter eating a peanut butter cracker, watching my mother slice an apple. Adeline brought Hannah in through the back door. My mother turned. She looked at Hannah. The knife stayed in her hand, but the apple slid sideways, and the teacup on the counter beside her, the white teacup with the small chipped handle, moved 1/4 of an inch and tipped and shattered on the floor. My mother did not bend down to pick up the pieces. She walked across the kitchen and she touched Hannah's hair. She said very softly, You look like someone I used to know." Hannah, 14, did the thing that 14-year-old girls do when an adult woman touches their hair. She smiled. It was a generous smile. It was the smile of a girl who had been waiting to be liked. My mother had not touched my hair in 3 months. I had counted. 12-year-olds count things like that. After that day, Hannah came over every Saturday, then Sundays. Then she had a key. She had a chair at the table, the middle chair, the one nobody had sat in since my grandfather died, and my mother stained it darker so it matched. She bought Hannah a stocking with Hannah cross-stitched on the cuff. She baked a cake every November 16th for Hannah's birthday. White cake with raspberry filling because Hannah had said once when she was 16 that she liked raspberries. I'm allergic to latex. I have been since the 1st grade. When a balloon at a birthday party sent me to the emergency room and gave me a rash that took a week to fade. My mother does not remember this. I learned that the year I turned 26, and a nurse asked her at intake, and my mother said, "Iris is allergic to peanuts." I'm not allergic to peanuts. Hannah Reeves is allergic to peanuts. When I graduated from high school in 2009, my mother was not at the ceremony. Hannah's brother was getting married that weekend in Atlanta, and my mother and Hannah had driven down together on Friday. My mother sent me a card. The card was a Hallmark card with a butterfly on it, and inside, in her tight cursive, she had written, "So proud, love, Mom." The card was not signed by my father, which meant she had bought it and signed it by herself at a CVS during the rehearsal weekend. When Danny proposed to me on the Blue Ridge Parkway in October 2016, my mother was the second call I made. The first was Adeline. My mother said, "Oh, that's wonderful. Tell me, what date are you thinking?" When I told her it would be May 2017, she said, "Oh, that's the weekend of Hannah's bridal shower. I moved my wedding to a different weekend." My mother missed the rehearsal anyway because she had a migraine. She came to the ceremony, sat in the second pew, and left during the reception because Hannah had texted her that Hannah's father was in the hospital. Hannah's father had been in the hospital for an unrelated procedure. He was fine. When my son Theo was born in August 2020, my mother visited the hospital for 15 minutes. She held him with one hand and her phone with the other and said, "He has your nose." Then she left. She had a lunch reservation at the Grove Park Inn with Hannah. They had been talking about getting tea there for months. When my daughter Lila was born in March 2023, my mother did not come to the hospital at all. I know what this sounds like. It sounds like grief 22 years in the making, the slow, private kind that women in my generation are supposed to swallow and then describe decades later to a therapist named Patricia who hums in the right places. I have done that. I have swallowed it. I have described it. But I want you to hold one image with me. It is the only image of my childhood I have never been able to throw away. And it lives in my closet, in a folder I labeled Church Fund, so my mother would never look in it. It is a crayon drawing. I made it when I was 8. Construction paper, the cheap kind. I drew our family. I drew my father with his glasses. I drew my mother with her brown bob. I drew Adeline in her field hockey jersey. I drew myself in the corner with my hair pulled back the way I wore it then. And then I drew, between my mother and me, a smaller figure, a baby. I don't remember why. I don't remember thinking about it. I just remember I drew her. When I gave the picture to my mother, she looked at it for a long time. Then she tore it. Not down the middle, she tore the baby out. She gave the rest back. She said, "That's not us, Iris. There's no one in the middle, that's just us." I was 8. I taped it back together. I labeled it Church Fund, and I put it in a folder, and I did not look at it again until I was 34 years old when the box arrived. I started seeing a therapist 3 weeks after Lila was born. Her name is Dr. Patricia Calloway. She has an office in a Victorian house on Edgemont Road with a green velvet couch and a small dog named Pickle who sleeps under her desk during sessions. She listens longer than she talks. She is, I think, the best $180 I spend every Tuesday. I came to her with a sentence I had been carrying for 10 years. I said, "I don't think my mother sees me." She did not flinch. She did not soften it. She said, "Tell me when you first noticed." I started counting backward through my life. The drawing, The wedding, the hospital, the high school graduation, the Hannah Reeves chair, the teacup on the floor, the birthday cake every November 16th, and the polite envelopes every July 12th, which is my birthday. We worked for 2 years on a thing Patricia called the civility boundary. Not no contact, not confrontation. Just 4 visits a year, Thanksgiving, Christmas, my parents' anniversary in May, and my father's birthday in October. No sleepovers, no unsupervised visits with the kids, no phone calls after 8. My mother said I was punishing her. She said it on a Sunday afternoon in 2024, into the speakerphone on her car dashboard while she was driving home from coffee with Hannah. She said, "Iris, you're punishing your father and me, and we don't even know what we did." My grandmother said nothing, but she sent me a card the following week. Inside the card was a single line. "I see you." Grandma. She had never written anything like that to me before. I taped the card to the inside of the cabinet over my coffee mugs. I read it every morning for 14 months. By the spring of 2025, my mother and I had reached what therapists call a stable stalemate. We saw each other 4 times a year. We spoke on the phone every other Sunday. The conversations were short. They were about Hannah. Hannah had bought a townhouse in Biltmore Park. Hannah had taken Mom to brunch at Sovereign Remedies. Hannah's mother had been a no-show at Hannah's high school graduation back in 2007, and my mother had attended in her place. A story my mother had now told me, voluntarily, 3 Sundays in a row. I would say, "How are the kids?" Meaning mine, and my mother would say, "Hannah's been wonderful. She's looking at a Range Rover." Did I tell you she's looking at a Range Rover? In May 2025, the week before, my grandmother got sick. My mother went to a funeral in Black Mountain. The funeral was for a second cousin of hers, a woman named Geraldine, who had died at 62 of a complication my mother could not name. My mother came home from the funeral drunk. She had ridden with Hannah Reeves. Hannah had driven her there in Hannah's white Lexus, and Hannah had driven her home. I was not at the funeral. I had a school art show. That night, I was on the phone with Danny, who was in Charlotte for a conference. I was sitting on the couch with Lila asleep against my shoulder. I said, almost to myself, "I think my mother is grieving someone who never existed." Danny said, "What do you mean?" I said, "I mean she cries on the phone with Hannah at 3 in the morning. She does not cry on the phone with me. I think there is a person she loves who is not Hannah. I think Hannah is standing in for someone." Danny was quiet for a while. Then he said, "Iris, if that's true, you'll find out. You always do." I did not know yet what he meant. He did not know what he meant. We just sat on the phone and breathed at each other across the dark. And I did not cry, because I had stopped crying about my mother sometime around 2018. This is where I have to ask you something. If your mother or your father has ever loved a ghost more than they let themselves love you, drop a single word in the comments tonight. Just the word "seen." I read every one. I'm reading them as I record this, actually. I know you are out there. I know this story is not just mine. It's a long way to the end of the script, and it gets darker before it gets honest. So I'm grateful for the company. 3 weeks after that phone call, my grandmother was in the hospital, and my mother was on the phone in the hallway, calling Hannah first. We buried my grandmother on June 14th, 2025, at Riverside Cemetery, in a section of the grounds that overlooks the French Broad River. The dogwoods were past bloom. The sky was the soft white of a cooled stove. About 40 people came. Most of them were elderly. My grandmother's church friends, 2 of her 3 remaining cousins, a woman from her quilting group who had not stopped crying since the prayer. The minister did the short version of the service because my grandmother had asked, in writing, that nobody go on too long. She had written it in a letter dated 2018 and kept it in a manila envelope in her side table. The letter ended with the line, "I have had enough words spent on me. Spend them on each other." I stood by the grave with Danny on one side and Adeline on the other. Theo was at home with our neighbor Carolyn. Lila was in a stroller asleep against Danny's hip. About halfway through the service, I felt Adeline's hand on my elbow. She didn't say anything. She just held my elbow hard. I followed her eyes. Hannah Reeves was standing about 10 feet away. Hannah Reeves had not known my grandmother. Hannah Reeves had met her, I think, 4 times in 22 years. Hannah was wearing a black sheath dress and a soft cardigan, and she was holding my mother's hand. My mother's other hand was tucked inside Hannah's arm. They looked, from a distance, like a mother and a daughter at the funeral of a grandmother. I had been on the other side of my mother for the entire service. She had not held my hand once. Adeline whispered, "She had no business coming." I said, "Mom invited her." Adeline said, "I know." After the service, when we were standing near the chairs while people queued up to hug my mother, Adeline pulled me a few steps away. She looked at me directly. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but dry. She said, "Iris, Grandma had a thing she wanted you to know. She told me last summer. I don't think I can be the one to tell it, so she made arrangements." I said, "Addie, what arrangements?" Adeline shook her head. She said, "Wait for the lawyer. Then open it when you can stand it." That's what she said. Don't trust me to tell it. I asked her 3 more times that week what she meant. She would not say. She would not look me in the eyes. She would say things like, "It is not mine to give you. It would not land right from me." The lawyer's letter came on June 22nd. It was a single page. It said that my grandmother's will had been read and that I was the recipient of a small bequest. Specifically, 1 walnut jewelry box, contents inside, plus a personal note. The box would be delivered to my home on the 25th by a service. I should be there to sign. The box arrived in a plain brown carton on a Wednesday morning. The delivery man was older. He apologized for the delay. He said the box had been in the lawyer's office for a long while because my grandmother had updated the recipient on it twice in 5 years. I took the box upstairs to my studio. I set it on the high counter where I keep brushes and rags. I looked at it. It was about the size of a hardcover book. The wood was dark, oiled, hinged with small brass pieces. There was a tiny silver latch in front, but it was not locked. I did not open it. I will not tell you that I forgot it. I did not forget it. Every morning when I walked into my studio with my coffee, I looked at the box. Every night when I closed the studio door, I looked at the box. Sometimes I touched it. Sometimes I picked it up and held it and felt how heavy it was, which was not heavy at all. I did not open it for 3 months. This is one of the small bargains of grief. We tell ourselves that the truth can wait. We tell ourselves that the dead have time. And so do we. We don't. What opened the box, in the end, was not me. It was Lila. It was a Saturday in September, the third weekend, the 16th. The maples on our block were just starting to turn. Lila was 2.5 and was teaching herself to climb, which meant she was climbing everything. I was in the kitchen making her toast when I heard the small thud and the small, not quite cry. I came into the studio fast. Lila was sitting on the floor with the box beside her. The latch had snapped open from the fall. The lid was half up. Inside, I could see the corner of a piece of paper folded and the dark gray edge of something glossy and old. Lila looked up at me. She said, "Open." I sat down on the rug next to her. I picked the box up. The wood smelled like cedar oil and an old house. I opened the lid. There were 4 things inside the box. The first was a photograph. It was small. It was the kind of photograph I had only ever seen in textbooks in the back rooms of obstetricians' offices. Black and gray with a fan of light at the bottom, an oval of black water, and a curl of a body suspended inside. A profile, a small forehead, a nose, 2 hands tucked under a chin. Handwriting along the top corner, in pencil, careful, the way you would label a school painting. Hannah Rose Hollister, 32 weeks. April 1989. I looked at the photograph for a long time before I understood what I was looking at. I was born in March 1991. My older sister Adeline was born in June 1987. There was, I had always been told, no one in between. The second thing in the box was a folded piece of paper, cream-colored. The folds were old enough that the creases had started to soften. I unfolded it. The handwriting was my mother's. I knew it immediately. The slant, the way her R's leaned forward, the way her capital I had a small loop at the top. It said, "If you had lived, maybe I would have learned how to be a mother." There was no date, there was no signature. The third thing in the box was a tiny coil of hair, brown, soft, wrapped in a square of tissue paper. The coil was small enough to fit on a fingernail. I did not unwrap it. I knew, the way you know things in your bones, what it was. The fourth thing in the box was a single sheet of stationery in my grandmother's tight, precise hand. The note was 3 sentences long. It said, "Iris, your mother loved a ghost more than she let herself love you. You deserved the whole truth. Forgive her if you can. Don't lie to yourself if you can't." Grandma. I sat on my studio floor next to my 2-year-old daughter, and I did not move for 40 minutes. Lila eventually crawled into my lap and pressed her hand against the photograph and said, "Baby." I said, "Yes, baby." I put her down for a nap. I came back to the studio. I closed the door. I took out my phone, and I called Erin Mahaffey. Erin and I were roommates at UNC Asheville. She is now a maternal fetal medicine specialist at Mission. She works 2 days a week with women who have what they call pregnancies of uncertain outcome. She has held a lot of stillborn babies. She has a thick skin, and a clean heart. I texted her the picture without context. I just said, "Erin, what am I looking at?" She called me back in 11 minutes. Her voice was professional and quiet. She said, "Iris, that's an ultrasound at 32 weeks. The fetus is named on it, which means the parents had already chosen the name. The handwriting on it is medical, not apparent. That's a text printing. The date is 1989. The grayscale is consistent with a Toshiba machine from the late 80s, which were standard at Mission then." I said, "Erin, was this a live ultrasound or was this—" She said, "I would need to see the full image and the wave readings. But Iris, this is 1 week before fetal demise. The positioning of the body, the way the head is, this is a baby who had stopped moving." I said, "How do you know?" She said, "Because the way it's curled. Live babies don't curl like that at 32 weeks. That's a body settled." I sat there. The line was quiet for a while. I said, "Erin, the handwriting on the side, the name, that's my mother's daughter." Erin said, "Iris, I'm so sorry." I drove to my parents' house the next morning. Not to confront, to get a piece of paper. In the basement, in the file cabinet that nobody had touched since 2003 because my mother had given up filing taxes and let my father do it. I knew where my parents kept the old hospital paperwork. I had filed it for them once, in 2008, when I came home from college on summer break. I remembered the box. It took 20 minutes. The folder was labeled medical, D in my mother's hand. Inside, I found a discharge summary, faded, from Mission Hospital, dated April 11th, 1989. Patient, Linda M. Hollister, age 28. Diagnosis, severe preeclampsia, fetal demise, at 32 weeks gestation, female, infant. I sat on the basement carpet, alone, and I read it 3 times. The carpet smelled like the same pine sol it had smelled like when I was 7. I drove home. Danny was on a call. The kids were at the neighbors. I went into the studio, and I opened the box again, and I looked at the ultrasound, and I said out loud to the empty room for the first time in my life, her name was Hannah. And then I said it again, because I had to say it twice. I drove up to Weaverville 2 days later. I had not called ahead. I knew my sister was home on a Friday because her open houses were always Saturdays. Adeline opened the door in yoga pants and a flannel shirt. She had her hair piled on her head in a clip. She looked at me. She looked at my hands, where I was holding a small printout of the ultrasound. She did not have to ask. Her face changed. She said, "Come in. Brian is at his brother's. We have the house." We sat on her back porch with the sliding door open. She poured 2 glasses of wine. Neither of us drank them. She said, "Iris, please let me tell it the way I have been holding it, because I have been holding it for 20 years, and I don't know how to put it down." I said, "Tell me." She said, "I was 18. I was packing for college. Mom asked me to bring down the box of Christmas decorations from the attic. I went up, I bumped into a smaller box behind the tree skirt. Wood, walnut. The latch was open. I thought it was Grandma's because everything in our attic that wasn't Christmas was Grandma's." She paused. She drank a small sip of the wine and set it down. She said, "I opened it. I saw the ultrasound. I saw the name. I saw the folded note. I did not see Grandma's letter. That wasn't in the box yet. That part Grandma added later. I sat in the attic for 2 hours. Mom yelled up at me twice. The second time she came up, she found me with the picture in my hand. She said, "Adeline, put that away." I said, was there a... And Mom looked at me. "And Iris, I want you to hear me." Mom said, "That is between me and the Lord. You will not speak of it, not to your father, not to your sister, not ever." I said, "What did you do?" Adeline said, "I put it back. I closed the lid. I came downstairs. I packed for college. I drove to Wilmington. I waited for the part where it stopped feeling like a knife. Never stopped." I said, "Why?" Adeline started to cry. The slow kind. The kind a 38-year-old woman cries when she has been holding it since she was 18. She said, "Because I thought it would break you. I thought if I told you, you would understand that Mom had never been able to love you, and then you would not have a mother at all. I thought I was protecting you. Iris, I was protecting myself. I was so scared of being the one who told you. I made it about you. I made it about you to make it about me." I said, "Did you know about Hannah?" Adeline said, "I figured it out by the time I was 23. Mom called Hannah Rosie once at a Christmas. She said it like a slip, like the way a tongue trips." I said, "Why didn't you tell me when you were 23? Adeline said, "Because I had practiced being the daughter who didn't tell. I didn't know how to be anything else. Grandma knew. Grandma had known since 1989, Iris. She kept the box. She held it. She told me last summer that she was going to put it in your name. She said you were going to need it more than I had." We sat on the porch. The sun went down. Adeline lit a citronella candle and put it on the rail. We did not eat dinner. At some point, around 11, I said, "Hannah Reeves. Does she know?" Adeline said, "I don't know, but I think yes. Mom drinks too much sometimes. She slips." I said, "Then I will go ask her." Adeline said, "Iris, wait, please, wait until you can stand it. That's what Grandma said. Don't go to Hannah while you're bleeding." I said, "Adeline, I have been bleeding for 34 years. I just couldn't see the blood." I drove home at midnight on the back roads. Danny was up sitting on the porch with the dog. He did not ask. He just held the door open. I went inside and I climbed into the bed, and I lay on my side, and I cried for the first time in 6 months. I cried for myself and for my sister, and for a 14-year-old Hannah Reeves who had walked into a kitchen in 2003 and found a woman who looked at her like she was a daughter, and for the small curl of a body at 32 weeks who had been named before she had been buried. After a flower. In early November, I stopped answering my mother's phone calls. She called on Sunday at 3 in the afternoon, the way she always did. I let it ring. She called Danny. I let her call Danny. Danny said, "Iris is busy with the kids. She'll call you back." She called my father. My father texted me. He said, "Your mother is upset." I let it ride for 9 days. On the 9th day, my mother sent me a text. It was 3 lines long. It said, "Iris, your father and I have been very patient. Thanksgiving is the 27th. We expect you, Danny, Theo, and Lila for dinner at 4. We deserve our grandchildren." I read the text 3 times. I noted the word deserve. I drove past my parents' house the following Saturday on my way home from the grocery store. I did not mean to. I was on Sevier Street, and I made the turn without thinking. I drove slowly. I did not stop. I looked at the front window. My mother was in the dining room. She had the leaf in the table already, the leaf that turns the table from 6 chairs to 8. She had a small stack of place cards in her hand. Hannah Reeves was beside her, holding the box of nice silver. They were laughing about something. Hannah was setting the place cards out one by one. She walked around the table the way a daughter does when she has done this for 22 years. I sat in my car at the curb for 12 minutes and watched. I did not cry. I did not honk. I did not get out of the car. The next morning, a Sunday, I drove down to West Asheville and I parked across the street from Hannah's insurance office. I did not know her schedule, but I knew she sometimes went in on Sundays to catch up on paperwork. The light was on. I sat in the car for 2 hours. I watched her come out at 11:45 and walk down the block to the cafe at the corner, the one that does the lavender lattes Danny and I used to like. She was in jeans and a navy sweater. She did not look behind her. She was on her phone. She was smiling at something on her phone. She walked back to her office at 12:30. I sat there until 1:15. Then I drove home. I did not go in. I did not knock on her door. I did not text. I went home to my house in West Asheville, and I sat on the couch with Theo on my lap and Lila with a sippy cup, and I watched Daniel Tiger, and Theo said, "Mom, are you sad?" And I said, "A little, baby, but I'm with you, and you make me unsad." Theo said, "Why are you a little sad?" I said, "Because something I didn't know is now something I know." Theo said, "Like what?" He was 5. He had no business asking this question. 5-year-olds ask everything. I said, like there was a person in our family who I didn't know about. And now I know. And I'm sad because I didn't know. Theo thought about this. He said, "What was her name?" I said, "Her name was Hannah." Theo said, "Like Aunt Hannah." Because Hannah Reeves had been called that for as long as he had been alive. She wasn't his aunt. She was nothing. She was the name on a chair. I said, "No, baby. Like a different Hannah. The first one." Theo nodded. He went back to his show. That night, I called Adeline. I told her I was going to Hannah Reeves's office on Friday. I told her I was going to do it without warning her. I told her I needed her to be at my parents' house on Thanksgiving, no matter what happened. Adeline said, "Iris, I will be there. I will be there for you." I said, "Addie, I am scared. I am scared that I will do this, and nothing will change." Adeline said, "Iris, you are not doing this to change Mom. You are doing this to find out what your own face looks like in the mirror once you have stopped lying to yourself." I sat with that. It sounded like something Grandma would have said. I called Danny next. I asked him to be home with the kids on Friday afternoon. He said, "I will be home. I will be where you need me." I hung up. I went to bed. I slept the way a woman sleeps when she is finally chosen to do something she has been postponing for 34 years. Hard, dreamless, like a stone. I drove to Hannah's office on Friday at 4 in the afternoon. The November light was already pulling sideways, the way it does in the mountains in late fall, where the days end at 5:30 and you can feel the year closing. Her office was the front half of a converted craftsman bungalow on Haywood Road, painted slate blue with a small sign in the window, Reeves Insurance, Auto Home Life. There were 2 parking spots in front. Hers was the only car. The other space was empty. I went in without knocking. Hannah looked up from her desk. She was at her computer with a mug in her hand. She saw me. Her face moved through 3 things in 2 seconds. Surprise, then the polite smile she has for clients, then a different kind of look that I had not seen on her face before. It was the look of a person who has been waiting, without meaning to, for a knock. She said, "Iris." I did not sit down. I walked across the small front room to her desk. I took a folded sheet of paper out of my purse, a photocopy of the ultrasound, with the name and the date, and I placed it on her desk, in the middle between her keyboard and her mug. I did not say anything. Hannah looked at the photocopy. She looked at the name, Hannah Rose Hollister, 32 weeks, April 1989. She set the mug down. Her hand shook a small amount on the way down. She said, "Iris, please sit." I sat. I did not take my coat off. Hannah said, "How long have you known?" I said, 2 months. Hannah said, "How did you find it?" I said, "Grandma left it to me. She died in June. The box came in July. I opened it in September." Hannah closed her eyes for a moment. She said, "I have to tell you something. I have to tell you a thing I have been holding since May 12th. I want to tell it before you ask me. I want it to come from me." I said, "Tell me." Hannah said, "Your mother got drunk after the Black Mountain funeral. Your second cousin's funeral, Geraldine. I drove her home. She drank in my car. She drank in my kitchen. She was wearing the navy wrap dress she always wears for funerals. We were sitting at my kitchen island, on the stools, and she had her head in her hands, and she said, Hannah's voice broke. She took a breath. She said, "Hannah, you have been my Rose all along. You look exactly like she would have looked at 36. I said nothing. Hannah said, "I didn't understand." I said, "Linda, what do you mean?" She got up. She went into the kitchen. She came back with her phone. She had a photograph on her phone of a page from a notebook in her handwriting. The page said, "Hannah Reeves looks exactly like Rose would have looked at 36. She showed me the photograph. She told me that she had lost a baby in 1989, that the baby's name was Hannah Rose, that I had walked into her kitchen at 14, and that she had felt for the first time since 1989 that her child had come back. She kept saying she was sorry. She was crying. She said, "Forgive me, Rosie." Hannah took another breath. Her hands were on the desk now, flat. She said, "I should have told you that night. I should have told your father that night. I should have called Adeline that night. I did none of those things. I went home. I drove your mother to her own house, and your father was asleep, and I tucked her into bed and put a glass of water on her nightstand. And then I drove home to my townhouse, and I sat on my couch with my phone in my hand, and I looked at the screenshot of her notebook, and I cried for 2 hours. And then I saved the screenshot. I have not deleted it. She stopped. She tried to find the next sentence. She said, I have not had a mother since I was 7, Iris. My mother left me with my grandmother and never came back. My grandmother died when I was 26. Your mother she has been the closest thing I have ever had to a mother in 22 years. When she told me I was Rose, I felt for the first time in my life that I had been wanted by a woman who got to choose. I did not deserve to feel that, but I felt it and I held it and I did not give it back to you. I sat very still. The room was quiet. A heating vent ticked in the wall behind her. I said, "Hannah, what did you do with the thing that belonged to me?" Hannah lowered her face. The tears came, but they came quietly. She did not perform them. She did not look up. She said, "I knew what I was doing. I knew Linda was not your mother because of me. I knew I had taken the chair. I knew every Thanksgiving since I was 14 that the seat in the middle was a seat someone had been saving. I told myself I was a comfort to her, that if I left, she would just be alone with her grief. But the truth is, Iris, I was not afraid that she would be alone. I was afraid that I would." I stood up. I said, "Hannah, I am not here to forgive you. I am here to tell you that on Thursday the 27th, I am eating Thanksgiving dinner at my mother's house with my husband and my children and my sister and her husband. The chair in the middle will be empty. I am asking you not to come." Hannah said, "I won't come, Iris. I promise. I owe you that. I owe Adeline that. I owe the baby that." I said, "You owe the baby nothing. You did not do it to the baby. You did it to me." I left the office. I walked to my car. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment with my hands on the wheel. I did not cry. I felt, and I am going to be exact because I want to be. I felt clean. The way you feel after you have finally told the truth to one of the people who needed to hear it. I called Adeline from the parking lot. I said, "Hannah is out. Thursday is just us." Adeline said, "I will be there at noon. I'll help you set the table." I said, "Addie, thank you for not breaking when I needed you." Adeline said, "I am breaking, Iris. I'm just breaking quietly so it doesn't get on you." I drove home. Danny was on the porch with Theo on his lap reading a book about a bear. Lila was inside napping. The light over the porch was on. The dog was asleep in the corner. I did not say anything when I came up the steps. I just sat down next to Danny and I put my head on his shoulder and I let him keep reading to the kid. Thanksgiving Day, 2025. Thursday, November 27th. The drive from West Asheville to my parents' house in Oakley takes 17 minutes if the lights are right. Danny drove. Lila slept in her seat. Theo asked from the back what kind of pie was at Grandma's house. I said, "Pumpkin and pecan." Theo said, "I like pecan, but not the pieces." I said, "I will pick out the pieces, baby." We arrived at 3:55. Adeline and Brian were already there. Adeline opened the front door before we knocked. The dining room was set for 8. The leaf was in. The place cards were in my mother's hand. I scanned the table. There was no card for Hannah. The middle chair was set, but the place card read, "Joy." My mother had relabeled it on the fly, the way she might have relabeled a luggage tag. My mother came out of the kitchen with a serving platter. She had blow-dried her hair. She was wearing the navy wrap dress. She said, "There you are, we have been waiting." My father came out from the den. He nodded at me. He shook Danny's hand. He bent down to Theo and ruffled his hair. Theo did not pull away, but he did not lean in. We sat. My mother at one end, my father at the other. Adeline and Brian on one side. Danny, then Theo's booster, then me with Lila on my lap on the other. The middle chair stayed empty. Nobody mentioned the place card. We said grace, because my father always said grace, even though he was the only one in our family who went to church, and even he only went on the high holidays. The grace was short. He said, "For all who are here, for all who are missed. Amen." My mother flinched on the word missed. I made a note. We ate for 19 minutes. At 19 minutes, my mother put her fork down and folded her hands in front of her plate. She looked at me. She said, "Iris, your father and I have something to say." I said, "Go ahead, Mom." She said, "We have been very patient with your boundaries this year. We have not pushed. We have not begged. But it is Thanksgiving, and I want to be honest. You have been keeping our grandchildren from us. We are aging. We will not be here forever. We deserve time with them. We deserve to know them. We have done nothing to merit this kind of cruelty. You are being heartless, Iris." She said heartless. She said it the way she might have said the word grocery. Calm, certain, as if the word belonged in the sentence. My father looked at his plate. Adeline reached under the table and squeezed Brian's knee. Brian did not move. I did not raise my voice. I said, "Mom, may I show you something before I answer?" She said, "Iris, don't make a scene." I said, "I am not going to. I just want you to look at something." I reached into my bag, which was on the floor by my chair. I'd folded everything together that morning. The ultrasound, the note in her hand, Grandma's letter, into a single sheet of cream-colored paper like a little folder. I set the folder on the table between my plate and hers. I opened it. I took the ultrasound out first. I placed it next to her water glass. The grainy oval, the curl, the handwriting. She looked down. Her face did not change for 2 seconds, then it changed. The color did not leave it. It rose. A red came up her neck. She said very quietly, "Where did you get that?" I said, "From the box Grandma left me." She said, "That is private, Iris. That is private." I said, "I know." I took out the second piece, the folded note. I unfolded it. I laid it next to the ultrasound. Her own handwriting. Her own sentence. I read it out loud, not loud, just clearly. "If I'd kept you, I might have known how to be a mother." My mother's hand on the table was shaking. My father was not looking at the table. He was looking at her. I took out Grandma's letter. I laid it next to the other two. I read it out loud. "Iris, your mother loved a ghost more than she let herself love you. You deserved the whole truth. Forgive her if you can. Don't lie to yourself if you can't." Grandma. The dining room was silent. The wall clock made the only sound. 11 seconds went by. I counted them. Adeline spoke first. She said, "Mom, I have known since I was 18. I am ashamed of myself. I'm sorry I waited. Iris just found out in September." My father turned his head very slowly toward my mother. He said, "Linda," that was all he said. "Linda." My mother started crying then. The kind of cry that is not asking to be comforted. The slow kind. The kind of a 64-year-old woman cries when something she has held in her hands for 36 years is finally on the table. Theo, who had been quiet, slid out of his booster chair. He walked around the table to my mother. He put his small hand on her wrist. My mother lifted her hand to take his. Automatic. The muscle memory of a woman reaching for a grandchild she had been telling herself she deserved, and her hand stopped. It stopped an inch from his cheek. She looked at the ultrasound, beneath her trembling fingers on the table. She looked at the small, living boy in front of her. She looked back at the ultrasound. She made a sound. It was not a word. It was the sound a body makes when grief that has been calcified for 36 years cracks for the first time. She pulled her hand back. She said, I can't. I did not move toward her. I did not soften. I said, Mom, look at me. She looked at me. I said, I am not keeping my children from you because I'm heartless. I'm keeping them from you because every Thanksgiving since I was 12, you have set the middle seat for a Hannah who was never yours. And you have looked at the daughter you had like she was somebody else's. I am the daughter you had. Theo is the grandson you have. Lila is the granddaughter you have. The little girl in the ultrasound is gone, Mom. She has been gone since April 1989. She is not Hannah Reeves. She is not coming back. She was Hannah Rose. She has a name. Say it. My mother said nothing. I said, say her name out loud in front of your living grandson. My mother said, almost whispering, Hannah Rose. I said, again. My mother said, Hannah Rose, Hannah Rose. I stood up. I lifted Lila onto my hip. I took Theo's hand. I said, I am not cutting you off. I am telling you what it costs to come back. When you can sit at a table with my children and say her name out loud, and you can apologize to me out loud for choosing a ghost over me for 34 years, I will let you see them. Until then, you can love them in your house, by yourself, the way you loved her. I looked at my father. I said, Dad, I love you. You knew, you were quiet. You owed me a sentence for 34 years and you never said it. Tonight, when Mom goes to sleep, I want you to write down on a piece of paper what you would have said. Then send it to me. My father said, Iris, yes. I looked at Adeline. Adeline stood up. Brian stood up. We walked out of the house together, all 6 of us. Danny carrying Theo's coat, me carrying Leela, Adeline holding my purse. And we did not slam the door. We closed it gently. My mother sat at the table with her hands on the ultrasound. My father sat at the head of the table with his head in his hands. The wall clock ticked. In the car, on the way back to West Asheville, Theo said from the back, Mom, is Grandma sick? I said, no, baby, Grandma is sad. Theo said, why? I said, Grandma is sad because there was a little girl she lost a long time ago, and she didn't get to say goodbye. And she has been sad about her for a long time, and she did not know how to be sad about her in front of us. Theo said, is it the Hannah you told me about? I said, yes, baby. It is the first Hannah. Theo was quiet for a minute. Then he said, can we say her name on the way home so she's not lonely? I said, yes. So in the car between Oakley and West Asheville, while the light slid sideways over the Blue Ridge, My 5-year-old son and I took turns saying the name of his aunt who had never been born. Hannah Rose. Hannah Rose. Hannah Rose. Lila woke up halfway through and joined in with her 2 syllables. Hannah, Hannah. We said it over and over until we pulled into our driveway. I want to say one thing to you before we go to the last part. If your parents have ever weaponized the word grandchildren to push past a boundary you set for your own safety, if they have ever called you cruel or selfish or heartless because you would not hand your kids back to the people who hurt you, please hear me. A boundary that costs them comfort is not heartlessness. It is the first honest sentence you have ever spoken in their house. Hold it. You are not the villain of their story. You are the daughter who finally stopped pretending to be the ghost they were grieving. Subscribe if you need to hear that tonight. I see you. It is June 2026 as I am telling you this, 7 months out from Thanksgiving. The dogwoods have bloomed and the dogwoods have dropped, and Theo is about to turn 6 in August, and Lila knows the whole alphabet up to R. I have not seen my mother since Thanksgiving Day. I have spoken to my father every 2 weeks. He calls on a Tuesday morning before I leave for school. He says, "Iris, I am calling to tell you what I have been working on." He has been seeing a counselor. He has begun, in his quiet, careful way, to say the name. He says it at the beginning of every call now, before he says anything else. He says, "Hannah Rose," like he is checking that the syllables still work in his mouth. Then he says hello. I do not interrupt him. My mother is in grief therapy, finally, at 64. I know this only because my father has told me. She has not called me. She has sent me one letter in March, hand-delivered through Adeline. It said, "I have started learning her name. I'm not asking for anything." Mom. I put it in the walnut box, on top of the ultrasound. I did not write back. Hannah Reeves moved to Charlotte in February. She sold the townhouse in Biltmore Park. She sent me an email the week she left. It was short. It said, "I am not asking you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know that the seat in the middle of the table is empty wherever I am now, and I will not sit in it again." I did not reply. I did not need to. The email is in a folder I have not opened twice. Adeline comes over for Sunday dinner. She and Brian sit on our deck and we eat whatever Danny grills. And Theo shows Adeline his drawings. And Lila puts Cheerios in everyone's pockets. Adeline and I have started a small habit every Sunday before she leaves. We say the name out loud, the 2 of us in the kitchen, with our hands on the counter. Hannah Rose. Just once. It is a small thing. It is not for anyone but us. The walnut box sits on a shelf in my studio, beside the photograph of my grandmother that I keep there. I open the box sometimes. Sometimes I don't. The crayon drawing I made when I was 8, the one with the baby in the middle, is taped to the inside of the lid. I taped it there in February. It looks like it was always supposed to be there. I am still my mother's daughter. I will be until she dies, and then I will be after. That much is permanent. That much I do not get to choose. But I'm no longer her ghost, and that, for the first time in 34 years, is mine.